to the WorldView Academy OD Talk. I was saying it feels like home this morning because there's so many people from WorldView joining today. So thanks for joining. Thanks for being here. Nice to see all of you, and the people that we haven't met. Nice to have you here. If you can, when we start having conversations, please switch on your camera so we can have real conversations. And in true WorldView Academy style, we will have some conversations today. So just to set the scene, most of you know WorldView Academy. For those who don't, we specialize in organization development, and we've been around for quite a while. We're very passionate about what we do. And most of the work that we do has to do with developing teams, developing leaders, working in culture. And obviously, because of that, a lot of the work also centers around trust, building trust, establishing trust, and what happens if it's there and if it's not there. So I'm not going to try and build the case for trust today, because I think everybody here knows that it's important and everybody here is interested in it. As most of you know, the Lencioni model that we use in our Purposeful Teams program, amongst others, has the pyramid of the 5 team dysfunctions. And right at the bottom of that pyramid, sort of as the foundation, sits the absence of trust. And Lencioni says if we don't have trust, then we also won't have there'll also be an absence of healthy conflict, commitment, accountability, etc., etc. And it's been coming up more and more in my feeds on social media and the sites that I follow and the articles that I read, that trust is almost becoming a hot new topic, but because it looks different, or maybe it looks different. But establishing trust in remote and virtual environments have changed, and people are thinking about that, and probably knowing that it's maybe different, experienced in a different way if we don't sit across from each other on a table, or in a boardroom, or doing team development on a Zoom class, or whatever it is. So we decided, let's get together today and let's explore the concept a little bit more, and just talk about what is trust, how do we define trust, how do we experience trust, how do we build trust, and what about what we knew pre-pandemic has changed about trust. So to start us off, I'm going to put everybody into breakaway rooms for you to go and have a conversation about everything I just said. And then we'll bring you back and we'll share what's been said in the breakaway rooms, and then we'll have a conversation from there. So I'm going to give you a minute or so to just think about what I said while I set up the rooms. And then I'll let you know when the rooms are open. Okay, I'm going to open the rooms. You should get an invitation on your screen. Hi, welcome back. Was that too short?
Good.
Yes. I noticed nobody came back until the rooms were actually closed. Okay, let's get some feedback about your conversation, to share and to hear what everybody talked about, and then we'll get some thoughts on that. So room 1 had Craig, Azia, and Janine. What did you guys talk about?
It's we're playing that game where who's going to blink first?
Who's going to unmute first?
but now I'm being cast in that role of, now I'm thinking like, is it too masculine? Am I now speaking up for, come on, Azia.
No, we trust you, Craig. That's the thing, hey? We trust you.
It sounds like blackmail to me.
We had a great conversation. Sort of opened up quite broadly around all the way from institutional trust, what's happening in the metaverse with decentralization of trust in a way, and then right down to the experience of COVID and the test that COVID placed on the trust relationship between employer and employee and colleagues, and maybe some stories of how some teams seem to kind of pass that test and some teams failed that test, and why. There were some lovely stories coming from Janine and Azia on the one hand, scientists possibly failed the test because there was no pre-existing trust relationship between the scientist and the general population. And the general population is no longer trusting you just because you're a scientist and you've got a degree or whatever the hell it might be. There had to be some human relationship. And in the other stories where the test was passed, it was because there was a human level of trust before the authority had to be invoked, if that makes sense. So great stories, I think, from Janine and Azia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds like a broad conversation from institutional down to the teams. Okay, let's see. Room 2, Christu and Karishma. What did you guys talk about? Who's going to unmute first?
I'm unmuted, but Karishma, I want to put you on the spot.
Thanks for trusting me, Crystal. Thank you very much. So I think we basically just discussed the meaning of trust, and we said that it was more of a bodily experience. Your body can sense when you trust someone and you distrust them, Also, we spoke about trust meaning being vulnerable. You have a lot of vulnerability to the person that you're trusting or entrusting. Then we said that face-to-face trust compared to that of virtual is quite different. There's a big discrepancy in the two. I think we've all learned during COVID and during our hybrid models working from home and in office, we've seen how a lot of people, you can't really build relationships, sorts of personal connections virtually, whereas you do face-to-face. And I think that plays a big role on how we trust people in the office. So yeah, I think that was just a broad, basic summary of what we spoke about.
And it's interesting because one of the clients I've been working with are still completely remote. And when you now said, Karishma, that it's harder to build trust virtually, their big thing that came up recently is recruitment, and then the interviews, and then onboarding. And to do all of that virtually, up to a point where you now build trust in a team with this new person, and nobody's ever met each other in person before. My brother is one of those people. He started on the 1st of April in 2020 at his new company, and to this day has never met the people that he works with face to face.
want. That's actually quite shocking. But yeah, you
That is
see it across
shocking.
the board. Yes.
But I mean, if you work with one of our clients, Caterpillar International, they have teams of consultants. So we work with their safety culture department, and they have teams sitting all over the globe. And I work with the people in Australia and I work with the people in America, and they work together. And they've never, some of them, all the new recruits since 2020, have never met each other. And that the option to meet face to face is now crossing from Australia to the States, where in my brother's case, it's driving from Pretoria to Joburg, and still it's not happening. So that's an interesting thing, I think. Especially if there wasn't a face to face ever, how do you cross that
Build on
boundary?
yes, true, very true. How do you build a trust like that then? It's very difficult, I feel personally.
Difficult, but is it impossible?
Not impossible, but a lot harder than it would be face to face, I think.
Oh, cool. Thank you very much. Let's hear from room 3, Janet, Richard, and Willem.
Janet, you can talk, please.
I was going to nominate Richard because he listened more than you and I
Oh, yeah,
did.
that's true. That's true. And he came up with that wonderful thing of his, yes.
Would you do it, Richard?
You knew this was
I
happening.
can have a swing at it. I'm a better listener than speaker, but let's give it a go. I tend to end up mainly in my point of view, which worries me, because that's in my head. So we actually spoke about a lot of things. We spoke about the 3 forms of trust, and Janet and Willem had very similar, but not quite the same pillars. And yeah, we spoke about it being a character trait and not a personality trait. Trust. I'm doing a terrible job here.
Trust
Well done,
yourself,
Ben.
Richard. You're doing a good job. Trust yourself. Go for it.
Normally, I haven't formulated something in my mind. I'm very my mind person. Anyway, and then I spoke a bit about how trust sits very heavily on a leader's shoulders, because because now my brain's gone blank. Maybe one of you two should take over. I'm losing focus here.
Sorry, Richard, I put you on the spot there.
No, all good.
I will. One of the things Richard actually opened up for us, which I think was extremely powerful, was the fact that it was, we started focusing from a leader perspective and going, how do leaders create trust? And Richard kind of raised the thing that, there are so many people who have serious trust issues, and they come into the relationship with trust issues, and navigating that dynamic and figuring out how we potentially as individuals or as leaders are building people's capacity for risk is a really important perspective. So we focused more on generic trust. We didn't really talk about what's going on in the online space. Maybe one other thing that I mentioned, and then Willem, there were so many wonderful things you said, was that I'm currently reading a book by Margaret Heffernan that is really challenging the trust that we've had over so many years in predictive models and analytics. And so our very foundations of decision making are really being questioned. These hard and fast, this is the truth, walk ye in it, is really being challenged and creating, again, different trust dynamics. I don't necessarily think it's problematic, but it's different.
I think that just as a pickup on what Richard said, is that the notion that we all come with our trust bubbles, and we play into that with who we are, what our own experiences are, and then we meet each other, we meet other people in that trust bubble who comes with their ideas. And I think then it becomes a bit of a mess. Coming back to what you guys have said about the virtual space, for me, if you go into that bubble and you haven't met these guys forever, you don't have that baseline of, I know you, I've seen you, I know your eyes, I see how you operate. So I think it must be really difficult I mean, I've had coaching relationships with people, and a month ago, after 2.5 years, I actually met this lady for the first time, face to face. So that was, and she was much taller than me, and I was like, really difficult. And anyway, so what's different for me was the whole idea about how we pitch up into that trust bubble. And if we don't know people, we don't have the intimacy, we don't have a relationship, and then it's really difficult to create that safe space where people can just trust, where they can just go. And it's hard work, I think. And that goes onto the shoulders of leaders and individuals, I think, to be mindful of that whole process and see how that works out, and to actually foster it and build it and carefully nurture it to make sure that it works, I think. So thanks, Richard. I think that was a really nice mind opener for me.
Yeah. I'm curious because Richard said that you guys talked about 3 forms of trust.
So again, there were 2 different sort of framings of this, but based on the work that I've done on engagement and my engagement framework, I've kind of identified what I call my trust triangle, which says that on the one hand, we need to, trust is built when there is good intention. And so often as leaders, so often organizational leaders are looking for the intention of the employees. This is often the other way around. What is the intention of leaders towards people? And if my trust is built when I know you have a good intention towards me, fundamentally, I trust what you want from me. Second thing is the whole, and as I say, I hate cliches, but we all understand the term psychological safety. So the sense in which I'm creating an environment in which people feel safe. And the third thing is functional trust or delivery. So do I do what I say I'm going to do? Do I create results, etc., etc.? And those three forms of trust are very, very different, and they're built in different ways. And I think inter-organizationally, that can also, it comes in there as well from a customer relationship perspective. The functional trust is the foundation. If you don't get that right, the rest almost doesn't matter. But the competitive edge comes when you get those other pieces right. Mm. The functional trust is just the foundation. Get that right first up.
Mm. Yeah, Jonathan, that's one of the thoughts I had as well, is if I work with somebody and I trust them to do a good job, to show up, to be on time, to represent the brand, etc. But I might not trust them enough to tell them personal stuff about it. But then comes in what was said earlier in a conversation I had last week Friday as well, is I should trust you enough to make me vulnerable. Was a quote of what somebody said, and I thought, okay, yes. But is it okay if I trust you on other stuff?
Can I challenge that? Maybe I should trust you enough. Well, maybe I should trust me enough to make me vulnerable.
Okay.
So we tend to have this view that it's up to you to be trustworthy. If I trust myself that if you are not trustworthy, that I will be okay, it's a lot easier for me to be vulnerable. Because then you can do what you like, but I'm okay.
I like that.
Wow. Yeah.
The other 3 things that actually speaks to that as well was Zenker-Volkmann and the green trust equation had similar things. They had credibility and reliability that speaks to your functional, Janet. And then they've got intimacy or relationship, which speaks to that safety environment where it's safe and the vulnerability to a certain extent. And then they've got self-interest, where that speaks to the intention, as how I pitch up and am I there for me or am I there for you? And I think coming back to what you were saying, Liesel, in terms of the vulnerability, I think the vulnerability speaks to or connects to that intimacy relationship sense. So yes, when you and I work together, you are credible, you're a professional, and I know what I have in you. You are reliable because you deliver on what we agreed. But if we don't have the intimacy or the relationship part, you're not going to share who you are with me. And I think whilst the first two are the hard signs. So if you look at the past, we thought that was trust, right? Because as a professional, you pitch up, you do, and you're reliable and you're good at what you do, and that's it. And then we go home. And then if you look at the research says that the intimacy and the relationship part is actually the driver of the other two. And that's where there is the vulnerability going to Lencioni. So if you don't have that I know you part with the vulnerability in there and the relationship and the intimacy, then the credibility and the reliability part simply doesn't wash it. And then we go back to this whole virtual thing and say, if I haven't met you and I don't know you from a bar of soap, and then the only level of trust we have is credibility and reliability. We don't have the others, or not as deep as we would have. So that was a really cool conversation to see it, Janet, to see your take on it coming from the engagement side. And I think it actually, it's a really nice framework if you put the whole thing together, I think.
In the newsletter last week, I said I was facilitating 9 conversations in leadership, the first conversation on that day. And my thoughts at that point was, it's a senior leadership team in an organization that's had a lot of stuff happen to them over the past. They've had 5 CEOs in 2 years. And they've got the newly appointed permanent CEO, finally not somebody that's in an acting position. And other people in the team were new as well. And the company was in the news because of bad stuff. And my thoughts in preparing for conversation 1, where we start with personal storytelling, was how much trust is there? I know they've done some work to start forming, norming, storming, but what's going to happen in this setting? And we started off with one of the facilitators that I'm introducing to them, and she was extremely vulnerable in her storytelling, and she set the scene that an exercise, an activity that's supposed to be 30 minutes took 1 hour and 45 minutes of storytelling. And there were tears in the room 7 or 8 times. The stories people told, the vulnerability, I felt so incredibly privileged to be part of that. It was just incredible. And I didn't see that coming, because I thought, oh, new team, don't know each other well yet, haven't really gelled very much, that kind of thing. And boom, it was there. You know, and then you know, you start thinking about, okay, we're starting to build something here. And then you lose momentum because the half day is over and it's a month before we see each other again. And I really hope that this has created something for them to work on and work with when they go back to work. But anyway, I'm sure we'll come back to that. I want to hear from the last room. Beatrice, Camilla, and Karen, you guys were in room 4 together. Beatrice, sorry, you were in room 5 with 2 other people who then promptly disappeared. So sorry that you were in a room by yourself for a minute.
No problem. Camilla or Karen, one of you want to go?
I'll go, but please, other people in the room jump in, because there's now been even more stories. I can't actually remember exactly what we spoke about, but I think we spoke a lot about actively working on trust, trust, on psychological safety, that organizations are, you know, that we are either involved with or working in, are actually having to actively work on the concepts, because it is surfacing as a major issue. I think we also spoke about leadership and leadership's frustration at their sense of, but we're doing the right things, but the actual lived experience from the employees is not. And that sort of disconnect between, well, we're saying the right things, but we're not necessarily showing up in the right way. And that's kind of mostly what I remember. So Beatrice, Camilla, please jump in, because I'm sure I've forgotten stuff.
So the other thing I remember, right, is we spoke a bit about the collaboration and the connection, right? So often you find that the trust exists within a small team, but it doesn't exist cross-departmentally. And how do we instill trust in a broader context, but also looking at from a strategic vision and business objectives that you want to achieve, right? Because you believe as an individual, if everybody knows the business objectives, the strategy, the vision, blah, 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 everybody's aligned, they know exactly what they need to do, they understand the why. Just when you think, okay, so we've got the why nailed down, everything changes again, and you're back to square one.
Yeah, that was a very interesting conversation we had about the shifting why. And the sense that sometimes leadership has that they're doing their best, but they feel like they're operating in a bit of a vacuum, and what that might do to trust levels as well. And I was just saying, in terms of quite a bit of the work that I've been doing, I'm just getting the sense, and I called it our old friend is back, working in silos. I mean, we used to hear a lot about that some time back, and then it's sort of, and now it's out there so much, this kind of silo, and we've had to ask ourselves the question, you know, has COVID and the move to remote and hybrid caused some of that? And the teams that I'm working with, or the organizations I'm working with, say partly, yes, but maybe it was always something and it's just kind of been heightened now. So that's a big theme that I'm finding at the moment, is this thing around within our own little bubble of a team or a group that we're working in, we can kind of trust one another to show up for one another and to not drop the ball. But when it comes to managing interdependencies between teams, I'm finding there's a lot of conversation around, we can't trust them. We can't trust them not to drop the ball. But what is, you know, so who's saying what about who? It would be interesting to actually get the other side of the story as well, because often these things are presented in one-sided conversations. And then I just wanted to, it didn't come out specifically in our group, but I found this thing around online and building of trust, or not seeing people face to face. And it was fashionable to start doing online coaching before COVID happened as well. And interestingly, I had a one-on-one coaching relationship with quite a senior person working in one of the financial institutions. An opportunity came for me to say, now that we've had 6 months of this and we're going to be wrapping it up soon, would you appreciate the opportunity of face-to-face? And she said to me, no, that will break the magic of the trust we've built already. And I was so fascinated by this that I didn't have time to explore it with her, but I really want to call her and say, tell me more, because how does meeting face to face change the trust dynamic? That would be really interesting for me to hear.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. Wow.
May I comment on that? I had a situation with a group, with a team, where it was a fairly hostile group, and with about 70–80% of them fairly left brain introverts, very strong introverts, and many of them actually made the comment, and we had a very constructive, very fruitful workshop, all virtual, 2 days, all was, I hated it, but it worked. And they made the same comment, interestingly enough. They said that we would have not been as vulnerable, interestingly enough, if we were face-to-face. If I was sitting on across the table from you, there's no ways in hell that I would have said what I've said behind my little badge. So sometimes when you see each other, then that makes it easier. But for some people, it creates that safe space. that it's I am in my little bubble. I feel safe where I am. Therefore, I can open up to you. I can be vulnerable to talk about all these things. But when I'm sitting across from a table, you see the whole me, and you can see into my soul type thing. So that was fascinating for me as well. But it made sense actually.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
chip in
thank you.
another quick story. I was working with a team for quite a while before we went online, before COVID. And I had one guy in this team. When I asked him questions, he used to give me monosyllabic, one-word answers. I'd known him for months. It was just the way I'm good at what I do, but I could never get anything out of him until we went online and he couldn't stop talking. It was absolutely extraordinary. And I had it documented because I was working through an exercise with them where I captured their responses. Absolutely amazing. And maybe so we talked about those three kinds of trust, but the other thing is we're physical, social, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual beings. And trust can operate on all of those levels as well. So the extent to which we trust people in a physical sense, socially, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, I think comes into play in this particular conversation.
Jonathan, you put something in the chat about strengths finder. So about 2 weeks ago, Craig posted something on LinkedIn asking the question about building trust, which sparked a conversation, which is where I met Willem. Because I had an opinion as well, and he commented on mine, and me and Willem actually met for a real coffee on Monday. We both
And we talked, actually, we didn't sit there, right?
we talked, and I think we talked for about 2 hours, but you know, it was so nice. But anyway, but in this LinkedIn conversation that was had because of Craig's question, I think Ingrid brought up the Enneagram first, or Christy or somebody, and I've been thinking about that a lot. So I don't want to talk about the Enneagram necessarily, but I think, and me and Willem also talked about being assessment agnostic, but of course we've got our favorites kind of thing. That working with that sometimes gives us some hints to understand trust better. In terms of Willem, when you were talking now, you said something about they were both, or they were all on the introvert side and something, you know, and if we have kind of a framework, whether it's the Enneagram or strengths or other assessments, it sometimes makes it easier for us to almost predict or not, or get it wrong on what that is. And earlier on today, it came into the conversation, I think in Jonathan, Willem and Richard's room, about you come into the relationship with your issues. And we had a lot of that in the conversation we had 2 weeks ago in a very casual catch-up thing that we do on Fridays, where we also talked about what's happened to you in your life. Of course, we all know that you bring that context in with you. And if in a work situation you've been stabbed in the back before and your experiences have been bad, then you bring that in, and the other side is also true. A conversation we had over a year ago, it was still in hard lockdown, probably 2 years ago, with somebody said, if you are naturally trustworthy, then you are also more trusting. Which I also thought was interesting. So I think each of these concepts is probably something we could explore by themselves for hours and hours. But yeah, so Willem's comments on Craig's LinkedIn questions really sparked some ideas for me. So I've asked Willem today that to attend and come and be part of this community, but then also if I'm allowed to put him on the spot, and after we give feedback from all the rooms, ask him what did he hear. So Willem, the floor is yours. What did you hear?
Thanks. I heard that I think we all definitely have our own perceptions and experiences of trust. And I think with Richard bringing the whole idea about how we experience trust right into the frame for me. Sometimes we intellectualize trust, and we talk about it as consultants, we talk about it as a thing. And then the person in front of you, just like me, sit there with my trust issues. I come with why I am the way I am, be that my personality, be that my iceberg, be that the little jacket that I wear, be that my triggers. And then I create this trust thing around me. So whilst, if you look at the research and the notion of not research, but experience stands across in our conversation, Janet. So if you look at what these guys have done with the trifecta of trust, and they've done this amazing research with 100,000 leaders, and they have proven, these are the 3 points of trust. And what I've heard today was that we all have our own understanding of what trust is, but and how difficult it is to lead trust, because you have vulnerability issues and you've been burnt before and you want to move forward, and then you move with the other person who sits with the same things on the other side. So this is not a straight line skill. This is a lot of intuition. It's a lot of reading the room. I think what I've heard today. There's a lot of understanding of where the other people are at, like that lady, that executive that you were coaching, Beatrice, saying, I don't want to do this, and then you get this curveball and you don't know where it comes from. So I think for me, what I've heard today is on 2 levels. The one is, how do I do trust? And it's just to be mindful. And I wrote the words that I wrote here was intentional. Richard used the words intentional. And so for me, is to be intentional, deliberate, and mindful around trust, but starting with me as consultant or me as leader. And how do I do trust? Because I'll be seeing, and I want to pick up on what you said about the profiles there, Liesl, for a moment. I think there's this whole idea about stereotyping. So sometimes when I made the call, and when I was saying the introvert, my wife is a serious introvert, and she'll take me on this probably. She says, don't box me. So I think we might be boxing people into an area to say, if you do this, this is how you do trust, and it might not be true. So I think, but it becomes a little bit more predictable, that people get a bit of an understanding of when I'm in that sort of preference, then I do trust in a typical way type of thing. So that's the first part. Second part is understanding how I pitch up to trust. How do I use trust? How do I do trust? And then the difficult part is the space about trust in today's environment, the in-office or work from home sort of space, the virtual thing. And what is it that makes people trust more? You mentioned the whole idea about trust. If you trust more, you become more trustworthy. It's nearly this reciprocity type of idea that Cipriani, I think it is, who speaks about the reciprocity of influence. That says that if I put myself out there, you reciprocate, and then you give it to me again, and then it becomes a spinning wheel of more and more. And that's where the vulnerability comes in, I think. If you make yourself vulnerable to trust other people, they feel a hook, they feel a place to connect. And then you create a certain amount of available intimacy, if I can put it that way, where people say there's a mensch on the other side, a mensch who is prepared to connect with me, who's prepared to put themselves out there and to put themselves vulnerable, to create a safe space where I can hook onto. And I think that's where it starts. And maybe that's the reason why when Zenga Volkman had this research, they found that relationship and intimacy is the kicker. That's the unbundler of credibility and reliability. And if you don't have that, you don't have that emotional experience. And I like this idea that you said, Janet, about the physical, social, emotional, and spiritual experience. Depends on where I'm at. Yeah, I don't know whether what I'm saying is making sense, but I think we have an immense responsibility, because everybody is out there. They've been hurt, they've been isolated, they've been abandoned in many cases. But whilst the world is pushing as hard as they've never been before to drive for results, to get things done, my clients are extremely busy. So they need they need the quick, light version of trust. Give it to me now, that we can just move on and do this thing. So our jobs with teams and with organizations, and I like the whole idea about that one of the teams talked about the vision and the strategy and the why. And then we are okay in the team, and okay, now we know what to do, but then now we need to start collaborating. Then suddenly that why and the strong bond we have, one team, one vision sort of evaporates when, like, why are you doing that? So, and I think that our experiences or our ability to move trust across borders, where people still align to what is important, that self-interest does not come in there, that where the whole idea about reliability and whatever comes in, and where does relatability speak, where does intimacy and relationship actually help with, there's this whole notion of teams, where people are connecting in the organization. It's not this whole thing, but it's just a team of teams. So it's an interesting experience. So yes, in a nutshell, I think trust is as surfaced as a huge thing for me in leadership development. I'm busy with 3 programs with totally different clients, and it's been the highlight for them, interestingly enough. Never done it before as a big topic. So yeah, thanks for all the contributions. I've learned a hell of a lot. Thanks.
Willem, you said a lot now. There's like 10 things.
If you ask me, I speak a lot. Yeah, I do.
but yeah, so there's about 10 things I want to ask more about. But first I want to just open to everybody. Does anybody have a immediate comment they want to make, or a question? Beatrice.
Yes, thank you. And amazing to hear Willem kind of talking about it in so many ways and presenting so many different facets to us. And just another thing I want to bring into the conversation is in our group, it came up freely. It came up as well, just briefly. And that is the consequence that sits in organization for breaking of trust. When breaking of trust is looked at in a formal way, in a formalized way. So, sometimes you'll have a leader, and the story that was told was about a particular member of the leadership team that broke trust badly in his team. And I think they actually let him go, or whatever the case was. So there's this thing around formalized breaking of trust in an organization, which is linked to disciplinary process. And, people talk in disciplinary inquiries about irrevocable breach of trust. And what does this mean? So there's this kind of formalized aspect to it, which is interesting. And then there's this kind of nebulous thing where in our group, somebody said they left because they were working in this toxic environment. And toxic environment obviously was linked to the whole theme of trust for them as well. And what was it about the environment that felt, and toxicity, and then this kind of feeling that there's no trust? That's something that I haven't read, I'd love to think about some more, because what do people really mean when they talk toxic environment? So I just wanted to bring up those 2 additional things. Thanks.
And it's true, there is a formalized definition in the labor law of trust being broken, and that it cannot be reestablished, and therefore it's grounds for dismissal. Thanks, Beatrice. Did anybody else? Richard?
Yeah, what's been running in my mind as everyone has been contributing so lovely is, and it's probably based very strongly on my personal experience, but I think any individual that steps into a business already mistrusts them because of their history, and it's a very imbalanced relationship from the start, because everyone will have a story of how a business they've worked in has done them in. And I think it's highly imbalanced at the starting point, and that's probably what makes it such a difficult thing to do. Because within your business, you're trying to build trust, but you've got you've got to make up for 5 other previous businesses' trust in that person. And the purpose of a business is to make money. So the relationship between the individual and the person sitting at the top, or all the managers sitting between them and the top, is already skewed, because you know that business is, when it comes down to we're in a pandemic, you're the one that's going to be let go. The trust is going to be snapped at that point. So it's a very difficult relationship. I hope I summarized that clearly.
Yes, and that brought something up for me. And Christu, it looks like you're back. Are you good? Okay, because I wanted Christu's to also just tell us what he heard. But Christu, before you start, when Richard was talking now, it made me think of when we did the OD Cafe. I think it was late 2019 on organizational trauma. And you were telling us about the two, and I'm gonna probably fudge it now, but the two almost models that Peter Block said of the bureaucratic structure and the entrepreneurial structure, but how we come into organizations almost trusting that they will look after us, give us a job, pay us at the end of the month, etc., etc., and how that is broken. But anyway, setting the scene. Christu, are you happy to give us some insights into what you heard today? You're on mute. You're still on mute. There we go.
Okay, now I'm not on mute. Am I audible?
You're audible.
That's good. I've heard so much. I mean, what you just now said about Peter Block, the entrepreneurial and patriarchal contract, which he calls them. The patriarchal contract that basically says, I look after you, and in exchange, you give me your obedience. And the extent to which that is broken in you know, in most of the big corporate world, is you know that next round of layoffs or so on are going to look after you. So your whole engagement becomes a very different kind of a thing. But I don't want to go too far into that, although I do think that's an interesting segue. I mean, the conversation has covered so much, and such a wide array of aspects relating to trust, you know, from the institutional, as Craig said at the beginning, to right to the point where in our interpersonal relationships we engage with trust with each other. And then I think also to the extent to which we trust ourselves, which probably is at the bottom. And both Willem and Janet mentioned that to some extent in terms of what do I bring into the relationship in terms of how trusting am I, what are my trust issues, etc. I think that's a really interesting domain. And of course, I'm tempted to go to the Enneagram, because the Enneagram for me, not just in terms of the various types, but in terms of the whole structure of the Enneagram, it tells us a lot. It tells us a lot about how we trust, what we, you know, not just in terms of what do we want in the relationship, or how do we show up in the relationship, what's our approach towards the relationship. I mean, you can have an Enneagram 6, which seems to be low trusting generally, because the world is unsafe, and I need to be on the lookout. And you have a very different picture in 8, and you have a very different picture in Enneagram 1. So we bring different ways in which we give trust in the first place. And we also bring very different ways in which we we come to trust ourselves, and we come to trust the world around us, or not, which I think is interesting. It brings a whole lot of complexity, and it means that the whole question of trust is not a simple question of do this or do that, although there is a whole lot of that. I think in I love the three things, the three pillars, three elements, three aspects that both Willem and Janet raised. For me, there's a number of things. I mean, the Enneagram story basically is that you sit there in the body center at point 9. You trust. You're part of the bigger whole. It's all is good. The universe is supporting you. Life is supporting you, and you are connected. And you fall out of that connection into the mind center, which is the point of 6. And in that point of 6, because you have fallen out of the body, you fall into the mind, and the mind now needs to try to make sense of the world. And that's the story of the mind center. The mind center is, I can't trust what is real. I can't trust what is reality. There's so at 5, I need to examine deeply, and at 6, I need to check out for all of the dangers, and at 7, I'm not sure it's this, maybe that, maybe that, maybe that. And we sit in the space of I can't trust my senses. I can't trust my instincts because I've lost this connection to the instincts. And then, of course, we form personality, and we form a relationship, etc., etc., and we project in that, and all sorts of trouble result at that point. So what's been really interesting for me has been the question of embodiment in trust, because we know in our bodies that we trust or we don't trust, or we don't know it because we have become disconnected from the instinctual. And for me, that is, in the virtual space, is a big question, because in the virtual space we almost become avatars. We connect with avatars. We connect with representations of ourselves, with something that is not real, and to a large extent. And I mean, this is not just happening in organizations, it's happening across the social media landscape, where we are constantly self-representing in certain ways. Fake news is being peddled, and etc., etc. We live in this representational reality that we become almost disconnected from ourselves. We can sit and stare at a screen for a whole day, and then at the end of the day, almost wonder if we still have bodies, if we can still trust that we inside our own bodies, and that we have physical existence. And I know this is at the far end of it, but it does happen to some extent, and it's just representations connecting with each other. So there's a kind of a pathway out of the mind back into the body and into the connection with the body. And I think it's interesting. I think Craig mentioned it, and Willem perhaps as well, around this thing of long relationships that you take into the virtual space. And it's not a problem because there is this existing relationship. We know each other as bodies, as human beings with bodies. I can sense your body, and I can sense my own body, and we have this trust that we are in this physical reality. There's that. And then if we can connect to the instincts, we open space for the heart, and the space for intimacy, where we can be vulnerable because we feel safe. And where we don't have to all the time make up representations of ourselves that we think is, well, that's the sort of representation that will be loved, that will be valued, that will be trusted, etc., etc., etc. And I know, Liesel, like usual, I'm off at the deep end, so I'll pull myself back.
Thank you, Christy. Now, what I love about you is you almost always come from a different angle. So thank you for that angle. And again, I want to open up. Does anybody want to respond to that or comment?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Christian. That really got me thinking. And I'm wondering how much of that is also the protection. Because I almost have this vision of how through COVID, people almost went into a hunkering down mode because we were all trying to be safe and careful. And that's almost increased our vulnerability to the point where I loved your idea of saying, you know, it's very much we've been in our minds because our hearts have been so vulnerable, and now trying to get back to that is actually quite challenging for people.
It's like after a long time in the cave, you sunlight is bright and sharp, and there are different dangers in the light and in the dark, and we can't pick them all up with a mind. So there's something that we have to feel very inside the body, and I mean something that I've picked up around communities lately is there's a theorist, Sarah Ahmed. She writes about affective economies. You know, in the way that Freud went on about libidinal economies, economies of desire. She speaks about communities in terms of affective economy. So it's an economy of love. It is then an exchange of love. It's cultural practices of love. And you know, if we really dig into trust, then below trust, deeper than trust, would lie love, and our capacity for affect for each other and for care for each other. And that's what we need when we want to be vulnerable with each other. So in these kinds of spaces, what does the affective economy look like? That's sort of the questions that I'm thinking about at the moment.
Can I maybe make a comment? I think, thanks, Christopher, for this body thing that you were talking about, and also the effective. What we found after COVID with our friends, and I guess that goes into teams as well, is that we were like strangers. Whereas in the past, we just knew, you know, it wasn't a question of where are we going to have a braai, it was at whose house. And now suddenly we haven't seen each other for like weeks. And then it seems as if your intuitive reading of the person, of where they are at, what's happening to them, diminishes. It's as if you're not trusting your intuition of that effective economy that you're talking about. That I'm tuned into you. I know who you are. I can see where you are at. I can see how you're feeling. And then we don't trust that relationship as we did in the past. Now it's like things would happen with you and your work and your family, and we wouldn't even know about it because I just wasn't there. It's like I'm not on the same wavelength, is it? So, and I think this whole idea about what I hear you saying there, for me, comes to the point that is that, am I tuned into you? It goes back to that whole idea about the affection and the connection and the intimacy. Is, can I read you? And that's what makes it difficult with this virtual thing. We've lost connection, but you know, are you there? Are you on the wavelength? Is it working? And I think for us as individuals and as leaders is to regain that. Say, how am I reading you? And if I do, then I'll understand what the present level of trust is, you know, because there is a level, good or bad, there is a level. Coming back from what Richard said, we've all been burnt. We've all had these memories of things that aren't working. It's burnt into my subconscious mind. This is what happens. So, there's the signal. You know, so this is just a thought that actually sort of resonated with me at the moment. Thanks.
Can I add
Yeah,
two
this-
more thoughts? One is oxytocin on a neurobiological level. Oxytocin is the trust hormone, and it is released when people are in proximity to one another. It would be very interesting to know if anybody did any studies on oxytocin in a Zoom context. That would be really interesting. But traditionally, we've always believed that oxytocin was released when we are touching, actually. So that's number one. And then the second thing that I was just thinking now in relation to what Willem was saying is that at the very deepest part of who we are spiritual beings. We have a set of beliefs. One of the things that happened radically in the COVID context was that people's beliefs were shifted dramatically. All the things we had assumed and that we kind of thought we knew and that we believed were challenged. And really interestingly, and Willem, this relates to what you were saying, is that sometimes even within families, we had radically different beliefs about how we should be responding to COVID.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Conflicts. It suddenly at our very, and you know what, when we are, because this is so deep and so personal, when we don't believe the same stuff, it shifts the whole dynamic of the relationship. Yeah,
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
it doesn't only apply to COVID, but it came out very clearly in COVID.
Can I
Great.
pop in?
Yes,
Oh,
please, Liz.
no,
Go for
no,
it.
you were going to ask Craig something. That's fine.
But Craig's been very quiet. I'd love to hear what his
I'm
opinion
more
on this
curious
was.
about what Beatrice was going to say.
Okay, I'll be very quick. Such amazing inputs from the last few. I'm loving what I'm hearing, and there's so many different perspectives being presented. And I just wanted to say maybe what we could be getting more curious around sometimes when we're in doing organizational work or teamwork or whatever it is, and getting leadership to ask this question as well is, who are you when you feel truly trusted? And how do you show up when you feel truly trusted?
Yeah.
And I was just in this last OD Friday check-in when it was just Richard and me having a chat about many different things. We were talking about this thing of trust conversation coming up again today. And I said one of the most liberating moments I've ever had in my life was working with a client who from time to time would phone and say, have you got capacity to do A, B, or C? And I would say yes. And then like a good little independent consultant, I would say, so, thank you for the information and I'll send you a proposal by Tuesday or whatever. And he would say, no, there's no need to send me a proposal. And I said, well, how about a quote around it? No, there's no need to send me a proposal. I know your work. I trust your work. Just send me the invoice when you're done. Phone me if you've got any questions. You won't believe what that does in terms of making me feel completely capable of and able to deliver whatever I needed to deliver and to feel trusted in that kind of way. So if we're in a work context or an organizational context, who are we and how do we show up and what is the potential for our performance and our productivity when we feel truly trusted? So that was just my little thing that I wanted to add. Thanks. Now I'm dying to hear from Craig.
I'll take the ball. I agree. I think I've put my finger on something that I've been trying to think about through the call, which is the trust context. So in what context is the relationship forming? And I do not discount a digital relationship at all. I think that's maybe a generational problem, but I think gamers of any age who game regularly with gaming partners from elsewhere in the world and spend a lot of time with a headset on, forming trust relationships in highly stressful situations, like people are shooting each other in a virtual game, and somebody has to have your back, and you've got different team roles in many of these games. they will form a relationship, and it's a trust-based relationship. I can trust you to have my back in this game. And in some of those games, you actually advance and you earn either, let's say, social standing or even money. So they matter. These are games that matter, and people form trust-based relationships quite well. So I'm very curious about the extension of human life through digital spaces over the next 10, 20, 30 years. I think this is going to be one of the biggest changes we have to our humanity. But that's that point about context, the context in which the trust is formed. And for many of us, that context was the workplace, and it was face-to-face. And then that takes me to the second thought, which was the disruptor. So when something disrupts that context, obviously in the workplace, it was COVID, it was the biggest disruptor we had. And then, in a digital space, I was thinking, a data breach on one of the online games, or when a buddy that you've trusted for so long leaves your team to join another gaming team because he thinks they're better, you feel betrayed. The same betrayal you might feel in a physical workspace. So there's these trust disruptors where I thought I knew you, but then this happened. I thought I trusted you, but then this happened. And sometimes that forces you to reset those trust relationships. Either as a brand, Facebook does something wrong and we all learn to hate them. I thought I loved you, and then more adverts than actual, friend stuff started happening. Don't like you anymore. So yeah, trust contexts and trust disruptors. And sometimes those disruptors maybe deepen the relationship if you can survive them. And sometimes they don't. That's what I was thinking about, Beatrice. Context and disruptor.
Thanks, Craig. So we have 5 minutes left of this amazing conversation. It's definitely going to be one of those for me where I'm leaving with more questions. But it's okay. It's good questions. It's interesting questions, and it's new ways of thinking about it. Is there anybody that would like to add anything before we end off?
Yeah, something popped into my mind as Craig was speaking, and I loved your angle, Craig. Is when you spoke about the online community and maybe you moved to, another gaming team, there's nothing wrong with moving to another gaming team. It's how you do it that makes the difference. And that's where the trust is broken. So if you say nothing and then that person finds out you moved to another team, you've broken their trust. But if you have a conversation with that person and explain why you're doing it and tell them with love that you're moving, then that trust is not broken. So it's not necessarily what you do, it's how you do it that makes the difference.
And there's that word love again.
Yeah.
Something that came up for me in listening to the conversations, Willem, you said it's almost like everybody wants the light version of everything at the moment. And I wonder what that impact is on trust and building trust in organizations and in teams, because it's true. In our work, what we're finding is, yes, we can do a half day, max half day at a time.
Yeah.
And you've got a management development program. Do you have a light version that's shorter? We don't have time, and this extreme busyness and just getting back to operations and returning to the world. So I'm wondering if the search for the lighter, quicker version of everything has something to do with why the topic of trust is becoming so extremely important and prevalent again in topical literature and in conversations like this. And then what, how do you change that? And then the other thing that you said was you said that the intuitive reading of each other was not so sharp after not seeing each other. And I'm wondering if that maybe has something to do with it. And Craig, like you said, some relationships are set up virtually in that context. But if the relationship was set up in flesh, face to face, and that's how I learned to read the trust signals and signs and give them off, and then that goes away, then that intuition is almost like a muscle that wasn't exercised.
Yeah.
And that's not so sharp anymore. Yeah.
Can I quickly
yes,
can I quickly respond? My frustration, utter frustration, with two of my programs at the moment is that we haven't had enough time together, be that virtual or in person, doesn't matter. But because the drive was there to give me something I can put in my Google glasses as a drop down, like I get a wrap at the Woolies at Engine. I don't have to this deep immersion, and then they have a few explicits after that. So, and it feels as if because the people don't take their time in those practice fields, they don't take their time to prepare, really prepare for this. They want the easy one. And then when they get into deep trouble, when they get into the crunch situation, they don't have the backing. They just don't have the hours in their legs, and they want to run the comrades. It's just not working with them. And we are helping them with the easy drop down this and the 2-3 steps to heaven there. And, you know, and I'm utterly frustrated with how do I help people to fundamentally understand the context. I love that, Craig. The context of trust without this disruptors, to go back to a baseline of, I know what I know. I know, I read, I can see it. Therefore, I know how to respond. And for me, if we don't make enough time to not negotiate an express version of, okay, trust is just the 3 things, trifecta of trust, read the book, and then you should be A for a way. I'm not sure. I don't think so. And I'm developing a strong resolution for myself around that process to say that if you don't do trust, if you can't do trust, you're screwed as a leader. And sorry for the word, you are in trouble.
I love that, Willem. Thank you for presenting that perspective.
And I think a perfect way to close. Thank you for that, Willem. Thank you everybody for being here and for participating and for chatting. And if you want to chat further, just reach out. You've all got my email. We love these types of conversations. We'll set up another one. And have a great Wednesday. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thanks very much.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.